Okay, today we have a 2014 Hyundai, I think it's a 2014, pretty sure it is, 2014 Hyundai Accent. Daughter's car, going to be swapping front pads and rotors. So jack the car up, jack stands underneath it, just going to remove the tire, and we'll be back in 1 minute. One thing you can do to make your life easier is leave the key in the ignition so you don't lock the steering wheel, and that way once the front end's jacked up, it's a very small light car, you can move the front wheel back and forth as you need to access the caliper, which is going to be on the front. Tire under the body just in case the jack or the jack stand fails. So you can see the front pads are a little bit worn. I think I did these 70,000 kilometers ago. They're both a little hard on the brakes. Ooh, this rotor feels chunky on the back. Ooh, doesn't feel good at all. We'll see that when we pull that off. So anyway, I'm going to grab all my tools and be back in a minute. Okay, first thing is remove the two. Most cars have one. The Accent has two. These are Phillips headed rotor retaining screws. You want to take these off while the rotor and pads and everything are still on, just to give you a bit of extra bite so they don't move around. Hopefully they're not seized. If they're seized, I have my impact screwdriver, which you just stick in the hole and whack, and it turns as it's being hammered in. Didn't need them, which is good. Now I'm going to turn the wheel this way. It's going to be the opposite way for the driver's side, and we're going to get to these two 14mm bolts that hold the caliper on. 14 there, 14 there. They should not be on very tight, and they're not. If they are tight and won't come off, there's a backing bolt, which is a 17 millimeter. You can hold onto that bolt back there on the piston, the slider pin. Did I move you too much? Sometimes the camera gets in the way. These two bolts did not have anti-seize on them, or thread lock, but I'm going to be putting thread lock on them again. So we're just going to pull the caliper off. Sit it up top out of the way. Oh yeah, that pad's done. They simply slide out. Rear one backwards. Rear one has the squealer on it. That little metal arm is the squealer. Tells you when the brakes are low. Second one. There's a lot of brake lube still on these slider pins. I think I did this before, but I usually use copper grease, not silver. They're both good. They're both fine. Before I bother with the caliper, place this for now so it doesn't fall. You don't want to let it hang. I don't have anything to hang it with right now. Oh, it's not going to hook there. Okay. I'm going to leave it hooked over the rotor. We're replacing the rotor anyway. Slider pins. Hold the rubber, pull the pin out. Wipe the grease off, the old grease. I'm using anti-seize copper grease. Stick it in, spin it, push, pop, done. Same with the bottom. push, pop, done. Let me get a bit more of this. That's a little too much grease on there. I don't know if the service department, when they checked the brakes for them under warranty, they might have pulled those off, the pads off, and re-greased them, but awful lot of grease on there. I would not put that. I'm not even going to re-grease these because there's so much still on them. Anyway, now we're going to retract that caliper piston. Using a C-clamp. We're simply going to retract the piston back into the caliper. Actually, I'm going to do it the other way. Make sure you're not clamping on the hose, the brake line. Clamp on the body of the caliper. And we're just going to push that piston all the way in. And we're going to hopefully, oh no, it's not seized. I know this isn't straight. It doesn't really have to be that straight. It's going to push it back in the bore either way. If it's tough to do, you might have to straighten it, but this one's going back in pretty easy. No seizing there. This is optional. Going to clean the back of the outer caliper and the caliper piston. Cleaning isn't optional. Next step is optional. Anti-squeal. It just keeps the metal from metal surfaces from vibrating against each other. And then on the two fingers. Okay. Now, give me 1 second to grab something to hang this caliper from. Okay, bungee strap located, caliper tied up. Now we're just going to remove the brake caliper carrier, which bolts to the back of the spindle, and they're two 19mm bolts to take off. Oh, 17. Aha! Jeez. Normally I would just use an impact gun, but it's not fair to cheat, so I'm using hand tools. Is that 17? That is a 17. Spray some brake cleaner and clean off some of the brake dust that's in there, some of that excessive lubricant. there's a lot of lube still left on there. Unreal. Now it's time to give the rotor a hammer whack because it's probably... Oh, no it's not! Boy, you'd think it was going to be stuck. Wonder of wonders. Oh, let's look at the back of this rotor. Pretty chewed. I hope that's from me. Just pulling this off now. Because that's kind of ridiculous. That's a lot of grease that was on there. But it must have been from me pulling the pads and stuff off now. But yeah, this is chewed up. Clean this off. A little bit of copper grease where the rotor is going to face again, where it's going to sit on the hub so it doesn't get rusted in there. Generally they are rusted in pretty good. Grab a new rotor. Okay, new rotor. Spray brake cleaner to clean off the packing oil which is on it. And I don't have a clean rag. 1 second. And just a clean shop towel to make sure all the oil is off. Make sure to match up the screw holes with the screw holes. And 2 retainer screws back in. That's centered? I guess it is. They're not lug nuts. You don't have to tighten them to the end of their days. That's it. And just for the sake of it, I am going to put the tiniest bit of copper grease on the one I wiped it off with, but they don't need much at all on these ones because of the old grease still on there. But if you don't have any old grease on there, a little bit of copper grease. Caliper carrier goes this way. Might as well put the pads on now. Outer one, again, has no brake squealer. Simply slips into the 2 slots. Until you slide it past the slot. Inner pad has the squealer. On, slide it over the rotor, and we're just about done. We're going to put a little bit of blue thread locker on each one of the caliper mounting bolts. One has had these off because there should be still blue thread locker on there if I did them last time. Not a ton. You're not painting them. squeeze those pads together. Blue thread locker on the bottom bolt. And set the torque wrench to 70 foot-pounds. Approximately 70, where's 70? $70. Check the first bolt again. Okay. Now we can pull the caliper down. Everything is done on the caliper. Make sure your brake line isn't twisted. Slide it over the pads. Make sure the slider pin is underneath. Where are we? Hello, there you are. And your two slider pin bolts. Blue thread lock, not red, blue. Finger tight. These are held on at, again, they're 14 millimeter, and they are 20 foot-pounds, which is not a lot at all. It's very little. So don't go cranking on them. If the pin spins, again, we can grab this, for the 17. That's all 20 is. Oof. 17 didn't want to come out of there. Now we're going to tighten the lower one. And we are essentially done. That is it, other than cleaning up the face of the rotor, in case any grease got on it. Putting the wheels back on, done. Thanks very much for watching. Once you're done this, pump your brakes a couple of times to push the pads in. The piston there is not all the way touching the pad. You don't want to go backing out of the driveway before you've touched the brake pad pedal, because the pads are not touching your rotor right now. Your brakes won't work for the first half a second, which can be hairy. Also check our brake fluid level. If someone topped it up in between, someone may have topped it up in between the pad change, which means there'll be too much brake fluid in there. And fluid level is sitting just at max. So once the pedal is pushed and that space is taken up, then that'll be fine. It's just at max now. But be aware that there may be, as the pads wear, more and more fluid fills up that piston space. So this goes down and down, and sometimes people refill that all the way to max again, so when you push the piston back in, when you're changing the brakes, it'll force all that fluid back out and may overflow. This one's not. Anyway, thank you very much for watching.